Thank you so much, Brendan, for that introduction, and thank you to DPAA. It is so emotional and special to be invited for the first time as Legacies of War today, so thank you for including us on this very important conference. We had a special request from Director McCaig to start this off with a Saibaidi, which means hello in Lao. Can we all say Saibaidi? Beautiful, thank you. Kopchalalai. My name is Jessica Pearce Rotondi. I'm a journalist, trustee, and chair of Legacies Library at Legacies of War. And I'm also the author of What We Inherit, A Secret War and a Family's Search for Answers. I'm also the mother of 2 young sons. And I'm standing before you today because my family, like your families, know what it's like to pray and continue to fight for answers even after it feels like everyone else around you has given up hope. I'm gonna try to use this slide. Is this advancing, the green? Sorry, actually. I don't think I have the slide advancer. Does anybody have it? I'm so sorry, everyone. Oh, it's already advanced, okay. I come from a military family. My grandfather, Ed Pearce, was a waist gunner on a B-17 during World War II and was shot down over Germany. He parachuted out of a burning plane at 19, landed in a German field, and was captured. He was a prisoner of war in the infamous Stalag 17 prison camp for 3 years. For those years, his parents didn't know if he was alive or dead. So when he walked back through his family's front door in Pittston, Pennsylvania, it felt like a small miracle. He went on to marry my grandmother and have 4 sons and a daughter, my mother. There we go. 3 of his sons followed his dad's example and joined the military. Mike, at the far left in the family photo, joined the Navy. Bob, the blonde in the front, was in the Marines, and that tall guy with the scowl on his face, that's Jack. Jack joined the Air Force. He's actually scowling in this picture because the family was going to Florida for the summer and he had a new girlfriend. He didn't want to leave her behind. He was a bit of a charmer, that one. But I'm so glad that he went on that trip because when the Vietnam War came, all 3 of the boys were called up. And history, rather horribly, repeated itself for my family. On March 29th, 1972, my uncle Jack Pearce was on a U.S. Air Force bombing mission over Chepon, Laos, when his AC-130 was shot down by a Russian surface-to-air missile. All 14 men aboard were declared missing in action, but an eyewitness on the ground reported 9 men rescued and captured by local forces. Because my grandfather had survived that shoot-down in World War II, he always believed that his son had survived as well. He retired early from the Pennsylvania State Police and spent the rest of his life fighting to bring his son home. He was the Northeast coordinator for the National League of Families, working closely with Anne, and he and my grandmother crisscrossed the country in their little RV, that same one that went to Florida, to meet with other families of the missing and to speak to anyone who would listen. In 1973, he joined a National League of Families trip to Laos. He interviewed refugees in camps and local officials and got within 9 miles of his son's crash site. Then he was turned away by police. When Ed got home, he marched on Washington, just a few blocks from where we're all standing right now, taking my young mom with him. Mom wrote to presidents and stormed embassies demanding answers about her brother's whereabouts and what the government was doing to bring him home. Jack was declared killed in action without a body or any additional evidence in 1979, a month before my mother's wedding to my father. She had delayed the wedding multiple times in the hopes that her brother could be there. My family refused to accept this and continued to demand an accounting from their government. I didn't learn about my missing uncle or the CIA-led war in Laos in school. We didn't talk about it in my family. It was too painful. Instead, I found out about it when I was 23 years old. My mother had just died of cancer, and I was kneeling on the floor of her closet looking for something to bury her in. That's when I unburied declassified CIA documents that chronicled my family's 36-year search for Jack and for answers about what really happened that night. Mom had lost Jack at the same age that I lost her. I grew obsessed with this paper trail my family had left behind, and in 2013, 40 years after my grandfather had traveled to Laos with the National League of Families, I went there in search of Jack's crash site, a place my grandfather and mother had circled on maps but never reached. And I wanted to complete that journey my grandfather had started in '73. I visited the village that Jack was bombing, I interviewed locals, and in the process, I learned about a war that most Americans never see. In America, it's called the Secret War, but in Laos, it's in people's front yards. Bomb craters greet kids leaving school. And I realized that those holes in my family, my mom's private grief as she was walking down the aisle at her wedding or giving birth to her children, all not knowing when or if she'd ever see her big brother again, those holes are out in the open here. You can see this is someone's front yard. They're building a new home directly behind the crater. Those holes in the wall in the left-hand corner, that's the local temple. So the equivalent of a church on Main Street with bullet holes still from the 70s and 2013. And the picture on the right is when I finally did reach that crash site of Uncle Jack's. In Laos, loss is imprinted on the land. The US bombing left Laos the most heavily bombed country per capita in the entire world. More bombs were dropped on Laos than on Germany and Japan combined during World War II, which is just astounding when you think about it. We dropped over 2 million tons of ordnance on Laos, the equivalent of a plane load of bombs every 8 minutes, 24 hours a day, for 9 years. And my uncle was part of that. And only 1% of the contaminated land has been cleared since the last bomb was dropped 50 years ago. People today are still dying from unexploded ordnance dropped before they were born. This year alone, 7 people have died and 33 more have been permanently injured from bombs. The latest accident occurred on June 16th in Luang Prabang, when an 8- and 5-year-old were killed, and another 5-year-old little boy severely injured after playing with a bomb they thought was a toy ball. Their mom had given it to them thinking it was a toy. Not much older than my sons. Cluster bombs like the kind Jack was dropping in Laos have been banned by over 100 countries because globally, over 50% of their victims are children. When I got back to the United States, I knew I wanted to continue my grandfather's work and tell more people about what I'd seen. I spent 10 years interviewing CIA agents, refugees, fellow families of the missing, and veterans. Then I wrote that book about my family's story and what I learned, What We Inherit, A Secret War and a Family's Search for Answers. I couldn't get those images that I'd seen in Laos out of my mind, and I wanted to do more. So I did one of those easy Facebook fundraisers we all do for our birthdays, and I dedicated it to Legacies of War, this amazing group I'd found online that addresses the ongoing impact of the American wars in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. I was shocked to get a phone call from Sarah Kulabdara, CEO of Legacies of War. Sarah, could you please stand? And she asked me to join her, and I was just so thrilled. She knows firsthand what it's like to live among these bombs because she grew up in Vientiane until age 6, when her father decided it was no longer safe to raise his children among bombs and moved them to the United States. As CEO of Legacies of War, Sarah lives and breathes our mission to raise awareness about our shared history, provide space for healing the wounds of war, and create greater hope for a future of peace through working with governments in Washington and in Laos to remove the bombs and provide victims' assistance to families who have lost limbs and loved ones. We can do this effectively because we built meaningful and personal connections on Capitol Hill and in Vientiane to gain access to cleanup sites in need of funding. As most people in this room know, bureaucracy can be a barrier to action. Our board includes former ambassadors, government officials, veterans, first and second generation diaspora community leaders, and citizens who live in Laos. So we combine our skills and know-how and we get things done. We have been a trusted partner in Laos for 20 years and care deeply about addressing the impact of war from all aspects. We speak regularly with leaders from both Laos and the US and encourage better partnerships, not just for resolving the UXO issue, but in finding our loved ones and bringing them home where they belong. We share thoughts and feedback. We hear from the people of Laos and from Americans. We have ears on the ground. We're here to help you, okay? Legacies of War is relentless. For 20 years, we have traveled all across the country informing the public of the history of the US involvement in Southeast Asia, made tens of thousands of phone calls, written as many letters, and roamed the halls of Congress. We've conducted research and written articles, published papers and books to keep this issue a priority in Washington. And it was legacies of war who inspired the first sitting president to visit Laos and acknowledge America's role in the secret war. In 2016, President Barack Obama announced historic levels of funding for bomb clearance at $90 million. Oof. This didn't just miraculously happen. It was a direct result of legacies of war, our partners and our friends in all those years of fighting until someone finally listened. And I encourage all of you and more leaders from the US to visit Laos. It's a beautiful country. There's just so much to take from it. And we have kept the momentum strong ever since the president's visit. And funding for humanitarian demining is at its highest in history. $75 million for Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. But it's not enough. All 63 provinces in Vietnam are contaminated. Less than 10% of the contamination has been cleared in Laos. And we have a long way to go, and we will never stop fighting. In partnership with our friends at War Legacies Project, we have pushed for funding to address another legacy of war, the health and environmental impacts of Agent Orange. For the first time in history, the US has allocated $1.5 million to Laos. I'm not a politician, you can probably tell. My family spent generations trying to get their attention. But I do know how to tell a story and harness its power for change. So when I joined Legacies of War, Sarah and I created something I wish existed when I began researching my own family story, and that's Legacies Library. Legacies Library is a collection of books, films, articles, and oral histories vetted by Legacies of War that tells the story of the American bombing in Laos and its neighbors in Vietnam and Cambodia. Legacies Library offers original programming, including film screenings, author talks, and interviews that tell the living story of the American secret war in Laos, ensuring it's no longer just a footnote in America's history. The library is a labor of love of veterans, family members of the missing, and members of the diaspora community. Though we come from very diverse backgrounds, we share a commitment to providing accurate and insightful resources on the legacy of the American secret war in Laos. For years, as I'm sure many of you know, a lot of what America was doing in Laos was kept a secret. We couldn't even talk about where our missing were. It made it so much harder to bring our men and women home. Now, we're helping to put valuable information back in the hands of the public. Information, as I'm sure many of you know, is power. It can be a lifeline for families still waiting. And the more the public knows about the cost of this conflict to families like ours, the more we can get things done. Sometimes it takes just one book or short film to get someone to sit up and pay attention. And we recently partnered with the Library of Congress. We have guides and contact information on our site where you can access Radio Lao broadcasts translated into English. The Savannah Fuma papers, you can actually see maps of where Agent Orange was sprayed in Laos. All these things were classified for years. It's such an exciting time to get finally some closure and some answers. So please, please use Legacies Library as a resource for your friends, your families, your neighbors, your congressmen. You can find us at legaciesoфwar.org/legactieslibrary. Another great way to get involved, if you feel moved to do so, is to tell us your story. I talked about my family not really sharing what had happened to Jack for many years because it was too painful, and I recognize the pain in our stories, but also the more that we raise them up to the public, the more we can get attention and answers. Please consider being a guest on our Tip Cow podcast. The purpose of it is to open up more dialogue around topics that impact our communities in the aftermath of the war in Laos and the conflicts in Vietnam and Cambodia. Guests have included authors like George Black, author of The Long Reckoning, a beautiful, beautiful book, humanitarian aid workers. We even had people who are training rats and dogs to safely sniff out bombs. It's really incredible work. So learn more at legaciesofwar.org/podcast. And lastly, I'm sure a lot of you have really talented young people in your life. Legacies of War is powered by our superstar interns. We partner with universities all over the US and have hosted interns from Princeton, the University of Dayton's Human Rights Center, PACE, and many, many more. We partner with each school to provide opportunities for students to do real work. Our interns participate in congressional meetings, conduct research, and do our social media and newsletter mailings. We're committed to investing in our young adults, and it shows. Last year, we're so proud of this, our intern Anna Pumachan, who's now a staff member, became the first Mine Action Fellow to address the United Nations in Geneva. Not bad for an internship. So if you have smart young people in your life interested in meaningful work on this issue, contact us. They can have outsized impact with us. It's info@legaciesoFwar.org. There are many, many other ways to get involved. We have a Lambong Circle for just $10 a year. You can support our life-saving advocacy work. If you're a community builder, and like my grandparents, you know how much community matters when it comes to getting things done, you can host a fundraiser to help spread the word. But for me, the best way to get involved is to share your stories of how you're connected to the region and our work. This part of American history has been pushed aside for a very, very long time. And the time has come to tell the next generation that are missing are never, ever forgotten. Some of you may be sitting here wondering how Jack's story ends. In 1986, a team from JPAC exhumed Jack's AC-130 crash site in Laos, finding mainly commingled remains of those 14 boys. In 2006, armed with new technology, the excavation team and the DPAA finally got my family some answers, thanks in large part to a DNA sample my mother had provided while undergoing chemo. She lived long enough to bring her big brother home. My family may have closure, but there are thousands of families still waiting. I want to leave you with the inscription my mom wrote for the gravestone her brother and father now share. Separated by a generation, fought in different wars, both shot down from the skies. The father, a prisoner of war, returned to fall in love, raise 5 children, and live a long life. The son's remains were returned 36 years after he was shot down to be laid to rest with his father, who had never stopped searching for him. Don't stop searching. Don't stop telling your story. Let's bring our people home. Thank you so much.